The U.S. Senate's dramatic vote-a-rama has ignited a firestorm over President Trump's sweeping Big Beautiful Bill, a high-stakes $3.8 trillion tax and spending overhaul that could redefine America's domestic landscape. $2.4 trillion in projected deficits, deep Medicaid cuts, and fortified border wall, sweeping changes to social programs. The bill blends Trumpist populism with fiscal ambition, yet with unprecedented ideological fervor. As Republicans fracture over ideology and electability, Democrats decry a vision that, in their words, throws millions under the bus. Amid AI restrictions, land sales, and ICE expansions, this legislation isn't just policy, it's a political reckoning. Will it forge a new conservative era or deepen a divided nation's rift? The answer begins in the Senate and echoes globally. I'm Henny Saif, and this is Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
Welcome back. The New York Times has reported that the U.S. Senate is locked in a high-stakes legislative battle over President Trump's sweeping Big Beautiful Bill, a $3.8 trillion tax and spending package that threatens to reshape America's fiscal and social landscape, with deep cuts to Medicaid, nutrition programs, and green energy offset by massive tax reductions. The bill has exposed sharp divisions within the Republican Party. As lawmakers endure a grueling vote-a-rama, GOP leaders scramble to secure fragile support, facing resistance from both fiscal conservatives and moderates, fearing electoral backlash. Democrats fiercely oppose the plan, framing it as a direct assault on vulnerable communities, while the CBO warns of a staggering $2.4 trillion deficit. The Senate's all-night vote-a-rama on Trump's sweeping $3.8 trillion bill sparks chaos and calculations. Tax cuts, Medicaid slashes, and border billions collide in a high-stakes battle over America's future.
The U.S. Senate has launched into a marathon overnight voting session, what insiders call a vote-a-rama. President Donald Trump's sweeping domestic agenda, dubbed the One Big Beautiful Bill, it's more than legislation, it's a political reckoning. Over 40 amendments were debated in rapid-fire succession. Medicaid cuts, immigration crackdowns, AI regulation proposals, all part of a high-stake legislative chess game. Republicans are pushing for final passage before July 4th, but unity is fragile. The core of the bill, $3.8 trillion in tax cuts over the next decade. The Congressional Budget Office estimates it will add $2.4 trillion to the deficit, raising alarms about long-term fiscal stability. Democrats call it fake math, but Republicans insist economic growth will cover the costs. But what does this mean for Americans? For low-income families, Medicaid cuts could strip coverage from millions. For small businesses, tax relief may offer temporary gains, but critics warn of future austerity. And for immigrants, the bill authorizes $169 billion for homeland security. Fueling Trump's mass deportation campaign. Ideologically, the bill reflects Trumpist populism, combining supply-side economics with nationalist priorities. Unlike Reagan's era, which focused on shrinking government, Trump's vision expands spending on border enforcement while slashing social programs. In a deeply polarized America, this vote is not just about passing a bill. It's about defining the future of conservatism. Will Trump's big, beautiful bill become a transformative blueprint or a divisive flashpoint that deepens the fractures within a divided nation?
To discuss the most recent updates concerning the U.S. Senate marathon for voting session on President Donald Trump's sweeping domestic policy bill, and to know whether will Trump's big beautiful bill reshape America's future, we're joined from Washington by Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, the Global Foreign Policy Center Executive Director, and Ms. Ginger Chapman, the lawyer and political analyst. Welcome to Think Tank. Mr. Russell, how might Trump's big beautiful bill, with its sharp pivot towards domestic austerity and border militarization, recalibrate America's global leadership and diplomatic leverage?
Well, first of all, Haney, welcome to Votorama. It's Votorama, so this is going to be an interesting fight on the Senate floor. Look, what's happening is this is pitting the Donald Trump Republican Party against its values as the traditional Republican Party, and you're starting to see that break out. As of just a few minutes ago, however, John Thune was hinting that they might be getting closer to a vote on the floor, meaning that they've probably made a deal with some big holdouts. You've got the moderates like Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, Susan Collins from Maine. But then the true hit to this, because again, this is putting $2.4 trillion on the national deficit, which sends conservative fiscal hawks like Mike Crapo, like Rand Paul, like Mike Johnson. Those are the types that they're worried about. They can only afford to lose, I believe it's 3 votes right now on this, using the rules that the Senate's using to pass this. And even John Thune, I think, is concerned. Look, they're using special shell games to pass this on the floor. I don't think there's a lot of confidence that this is going to do what everybody thinks it's going to do, and it's going to directly affect the people that elected Donald Trump and his supporters in 2024.
Ms. Chapman, amid the fierce legal challenges expected over Medicaid and the work requirements, 11 million projected to lose coverage, how constitutionally defensible are the bill's sweeping social reforms?
Yes. Well, thank you for having us today, Haney. And well, as we can see from the battles on the Senate floor and the concern of the American people, there are many aspects to this bill that are causing alarm. Healthcare in America is one of our third rails. It's an incredibly volatile system that it seems to be continuously on the border of collapse, and that is because our healthcare system is in need of reform. We have just stacked laws upon laws upon laws for decades, trying to lower costs and serve more people, and the ultimate result has been that
we seem to have lost the connection with Ms. Chapman. Mr. Russell, let me ask you a question now. Given the bill's emphasis on the isolationist economics and reduce foreign aid, how do you think it will the U.S. credibility, the trust and trade relations with key allies in Europe and Asia?
Annie, we're starting to see the result of that right now. I mean, we're starting to see more and more cohesion in the EU and the EC than we've ever seen before, and that's because the foreign policy of the Trump administration has kind of driven it that way. They're going to become more reliant on each other as opposed to kind of being locked arm with the U.S. We're also starting to see a shift in economics. Look, Jerome Powell yesterday was asked about why they're not raising interest rates, and he basically came out and said one word: tariffs. Uh, everybody pointed out that the other central banks are lowering even by a quarter or a half point, but they're lowering their interest rates. When on that, Jerome Powell basically said, "Look, we're seeing the cost of things like electronics, appliances that are imported from overseas starting to rise, and we're starting to see hints of inflation. They are going to take a wait and see. They may do it if everything kind of settles down and the politics settle down by the end of the year, but this is going to directly affect the nationalistic, isolationist, tariff war administration that Trump is running is going to cost Americans money. It's going to leave us in a bigger financial hole as a government. It's going to put us at bigger financial risk as Americans. There's a lot of problems going around, and nobody in the Trump Republican Party wants to admit that or discuss it.
Mm-hmm. We got reconnected to Ms. Chapman. So could the unprecedented use reconciliation to pass such wide-ranging changes set a dangerous precedent by bypassing consensus in future Congresses?
Yes. Well, as we see, the Republicans are desperately trying to create workarounds to the Democrat resistance in the Senate. However, as your other guests mentioned, this budget bill appears to be a very large, dramatic shakeup of the old economic order. It should be pointed out that the economic path America was on was unsustainable, and this bill is an attempt to cut government spending. Right now, our deficit is $36 trillion. Without this bill, it's expected to reach $50 trillion by 2035. So the current path America is on is unsustainable. We do need dramatic reforms. For example, however, some of these reforms are going to shake up our industries. For example, the contrast between treatment of oil and gas versus green energy, social justice programs versus nuts and bolts economic considerations such as manufacturing, mining, agriculture. So this bill is actually a reshaping of America's foreign policy. It's an attempt to bring manufacturing back home, to get healthcare costs under control. Healthcare is an enormous political football. There are vast sums of money involved, and our healthcare system has become industrialized and corporatized. So the American patients are already suffering under a lack of care. This bill does attempt to make up for the cuts in Medicare by increasing funding to the areas where money is desperately needed. For example, rural hospitals are going bankrupt because of the current cuts to Medicare. Their payments are not enough to keep them afloat. So this bill does create a $25 billion fund for rural hospitals. This bill tries to bolster our energy production by lowering taxes on energy producers and also by cutting subsidies on trendy green energy projects that ultimately do not deliver any energy to the American people. This bill tries to encourage tech businesses, giving research and development pro-growth business tax cuts. So there is a mixed bag in this bill. There are attempts to help the American working class by making it easier to afford homes. And at the same time, there are cuts and restrictions on CEO executive compensation. But as your guest mentioned, the big issues are healthcare. The Democrat messaging on this is successful. They are saying that healthcare, basically, Trump is cutting taxes on billionaires in order to take health care away from poor people. Mm-hmm. This is an effective message that could cost Trump in the midterm elections. because the Democrats can capitalize on that image of Republicans as being heartless. However, it's also costing Trump in the short run, as we've seen two senators from North Carolina and Nebraska have announced they are going to vote no on the bill, and then they are not going to run for re-election. So this will hurt Trump and the Republican Party in the midterms, and Trump is having a very difficult time because the Republican Party is very diverse. We have rich Republicans in the cities, poor Republicans that live out in the country. And so this bill is an attempt to help the working class, help industry, agriculture, mining, manufacturing. However, because of the size of this bill, and this is a problem for American legislatures, all of our reform bills, comprehensive bills, big bills have so many internal conflicts built into them that they have a harder time of passing and more opportunity for deals that wind up going against the goal of the bill.
Well, Mr. Russell, there's a proposed $5 trillion debt limit. Could it increase alongside defense, restraint created economic vulnerabilities that adversaries like China or Russia may exploit geopolitically?
The short answer is yes, but we have to look at that in a little greater detail. Here's why: is if you look at what they're trying to do, for example, the huge cuts in farm subsidies in this bill, that's going to send everybody, every farmer in the Midwest, and again, these are people in states that elected Donald Trump. They're going to have a hard time getting to sell their product overseas, and people aren't going to buy their product because of the tariff wars. That means that they're going to suffer economically. And then what's that going to do? The people who normally buy the grain, the soybeans, etc., from those farmers here in the United States are going to say, look, I need that anyway. I got to feed my people. So guess what? I'm going to go where I can buy that without any hassle. China, or I'll go to India, or I'll go to somewhere else other than the United States. So you have that aspect. The bill directly affects. The one thing I want to point out here also is that what this bill does, this nationalistic center, I mean, we're talking about $160 billion for Trump's Golden Dome. I mean, an air defense system like they have in Israel, but for the United States. That is crazy idiotic, and it makes no sense. There is no threat of anything like that happening if Donald Trump is the great deal maker that he says he is. Why do we need a Golden Dome? So what we're doing is throwing money against the wall. It's a bunch of talking points, and the Republicans are buying into it. We're starting to see some resistance in this. As my colleague pointed out, we're starting to see, at least 4 senators, which if all four senators vote no, this is in the water, but they're having to make deals. For example, the deal that they're making with Lisa Murkowski, they tried giving her back her Medicaid money. Well, what about the folks in South Dakota or in Kansas that need that money that aren't going to get that same deal? So there's a lot of realization, and this big, beautiful bill, let's look at the polling on this. You're talking about a bill that has public polling, and I've gone through 5 different polls this week, anywhere from 70% of the American population absolutely think this is a disaster for them to somewhere around 53% think that this is going to impact them in a difficult way. This is a bad bill, not a big, beautiful bill. And I think Donald Trump overleaned his ski tips in pushing this forward and making this his agenda.
Well, it's not just the Medicare, but also, Ms. Chapman, the bill tightens eligibility for food stamps and housing aid. How might this reshape the judicial landscape of economic rights litigation in the U.S.?
Yes. Well, one of the other controversial aspects of this bill are the cuts to food stamps and other welfare programs. The truth is, our welfare programs, well, first, the federal government is paying for the bulk of welfare costs. And because the federal government is in debt, the Trump's bill is trying to pass some of these costs onto the states. And this is because the level of fraud, waste, and abuse is so high that the states do not really have any guardrails. They will just allow anyone into the welfare programs, which is one of the things that contributes to the waste, fraud, and abuse. The federal government is saying, hey, states, if you're responsible for some of these payments, then you will be more accountable and you will eliminate the wasteful spending. This is controversial because the states do not want to have to, no one wants to give up free money from the federal government. They're all going to fight to keep it, even though every American pays for the federal government, and then that money is redistributed to the states. Your other guest, Justin, raises an important point, which is our military spending. And this is the elephant in the room no one wants to talk about. We have just increased our military budget to $1 trillion. We just recently spent $1 billion in Yemen, losing to Ansar Allah. And it turns out we spent $800 million during Israel's 12-day war against Iran just on just on air defense missiles to protect the skies over Israel. So our military spending is out of control, and this is one of the things that desperately needs to be cut. However, the Republican Party and many Democrats do not want to look at military spending, which is why we are now arguing over cuts to Medicare, cuts to food stamps. And in truth, the American economic situation, because of our $36 trillion in debt, because of our deficit spending, we're a debtor nation and we're also a borrower nation, which means we owe a lot of money and we're still borrowing a lot of money. And this is going to become unsustainable as other countries sell our treasuries, as our interest rates rise. This is going to lower the value of the dollar and negatively impact Americans' pocketbooks by inflation, which is a hidden tax. So we do need to do something about this, about our economy at this time. Trump's bill is imperfect. There is a lot of sausage making as the senators wheel and deal. Your guest mentioned the dynamic scoring of the bill. He mentions it's a $4 trillion bill. However, with the economic growth projected to come, the 0.8% of increase in GDP over 10 years, this is expected to pay for about 22% of the bill, bringing the cost down to about $3 trillion. There is also the spending cuts. Now, this does make our tax code a little more complicated, but the spending cuts are tied to the tax cuts so that if we do not reduce spending, then the tax cuts are reduced dollar for dollar. So the CBO and other organizations, they say this will really only be about a $1.7 trillion increase.
Yes, well, it seems that there are restrictions, AI restrictions, land sales, also environmental affairs. Mr. Russell, how will the redirection of the federal resources away from global health and development initiatives impact the U.S. standing in Africa and Latin America?
Oh, Haney, we're that ship has sailed. The day that they dismantled USAID and other programs, the Foreign Agricultural Service, took a beating. All of that is already starting to reflect hard. Look, I've recently been to the Middle East, and I just got back from South America in the past week or two. And I've talked to leaders in both countries, and I got to tell you something. The reality is that I'm hearing the same common message. When it comes to trade, we're losing. We're losing our shirt. Every leader that I spoke to, including a couple of heads of state, who said, "Look, we want to trade with you. We want to be a trading partner. We want you guys to be our biggest trading partner, but you guys make it so difficult." That we have to go look for other sourcings. I have a responsibility to my people. I hear that time and time again, and that has become a recurring factor. What that says to us is we're losing soft power credibility. What this bill does is just exacerbate the loss of soft power that we have globally, and it puts a wedge between us and the rest of the world. And what it does is drive the rest of the world economically into the hands of the BRIC folks.
Yes.
Brazil, India, Russia, China.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, the Global Foreign Policy Center Executive Director, and Ms. Ginger Chapman, the lawyer and political analyst. Thank you both for your special insights and this valuable discussion. The battle over Trump's big, beautiful bill rages on, exposing the deep divisions at home and reshaping America's role abroad. As the Senate decides the nation's fiscal and social future, the world will be following. This is more than just policy. It's a political turning point. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank. I'm Henny Seif. Thank you for joining us.